Today we're going to talk about the third Varga, which is called the Drekkana in Vedic astrology. The Western term for this Varga is the Dekana. Deka means 10, so it has to do with 10-degree portions, because when we take a sign and divide it by 3, we get 3 10-degree portions. Now the Drekkana, or the Dekana as it's called in the West, is one of the only Vargas that's made mention of in any of the old Western books. I believe the only 2 that are mentioned in the Western books are the Dekana and also the Dwadasamsha, dividing the sign into 12 parts, if I remember correctly. Leo wrote about those over 100 years ago. But most of the other Vargas are really ignored in Western astrology. But this Drekkana definitely was something that was used in the West. And the Tajika system, the Persian system that is preserved in India, uses all the Vargas from Vargas 1 to 12. So at some point, Western astrologers in the distant past probably used more than just 1 or 2 Vargas. But they never really used them as charts. They just used them as 10-degree portions within the chart. So in the handout that I've given you, there's a lot of copying from a lot of the old books, and some of the authors of those old books called the Drekkana. Some of it translated it as Decanate. So when you see that word Decanate in your handout, that's the Western term for the Drekkana. Okay? So Drekkana is simply when we take each sign and divide it into 3 parts. So because of that, we're going to have 36 Drekkanas. 3 times 12, 36 Drekkanas. Okay, real simple. Now, what is the Drekkana for? Parashar lets us know that the Drekkana has to do with happiness with siblings. Now, he doesn't say siblings. And that's a big mistake that most astrologers make. If you go to an astrologer and you go, well, tell me something about my brother. What they do is they go to your Drekkana chart and they start reading your brother's life from the Drekkana. No, that's not right. The Drekkana is your happiness, your relationship with your siblings. It's not your siblings' life. Okay? How do you see your siblings' life? Well, the same way you read your life. If you want to read your life, you read the Rashi chart from the Lagna. You read the Navamsha from the Lagna. You read the Dasamsha from the Lagna. You read the Hora from the Lagna. And you read the Drekkana from the Lagna. You read all the Varga charts from the Lagna to read everything about your life. And that's the same thing you do to read about your sibling's life or any other person's life. You look from their Lagna in each Varga. So if you want to see about your younger sibling's life, you read the chart from the 3rd Bhava cusp in the Rashi chart, from the 3rd Bhava cusp in the Hora chart, from the 3rd Bhava cusp in the Drekkana chart, from the 3rd Bhava cusp in the Chaturtamsha or 4th Varga. You read every Varga from the 3rd Bhava cusp. And then you read everything about that. So if you want to see your siblings, your younger siblings' marriage, you look at the 3rd cusp in the Navamsha and read it from that 3rd cusp as the starting point. Okay? So, Parashar specifically says happiness with siblings. Okay, which means the happiness we have from our siblings in our life. Now, Sanketa Nidhi says happiness, etc. with relations should be known from Drekkana. And that's an important point because as you're going to see, the Drekkana has to do with much, much more than just your happiness with relating to your siblings. It has to do with all relationships. And Saravelli says, a planet in its own decadent confers virtues. So that's interesting too. You get virtues, very good qualities, if a planet's in its own Drekkana. Now what is a virtue really? Okay, when we talk about virtues, we're usually talking about modes of behavior that are beneficial to everybody. Okay, that's like sort of the general idea of a virtue. Okay, someone whose mode of behavior is something that benefits everyone that they're associated with. And because the Drekkana is such an important chart for how we associate with everybody. A planet in its own Drekkana, basically a planet that's really strong and healthy in the Drekkana, gives us the virtue of being able to work in association with people. Because all by yourself, there's no such thing as virtue, really. You know, what does it matter if you're a knight in shining armor if you're all alone and you never associate with anybody? You know, it doesn't matter if you have the virtue of a knight in shining armor if you're all alone, right? So, virtue in the context that we're using in the context of the Drekkana is how we associate with people. Do we associate in a virtuous way or in a way that it has a lack of virtuosity, if that's even a word? Anyway, so a planet's own Drekkana will give us good qualities of association with others. Now, let's think about it a minute. The Drekkana chart is the Varga for the third house, right? And we learned in our Baba course that one of the inner meaning of the third Baba is our social ability, right? Okay? It's our ability to interact in a productive way with other people. We develop that with our siblings. And sure, that's hard. It's difficult to interact in a productive way with people. Everything ruled by the third house, the house of difficulties, has an element of hard work to it. Mathematics, our basic studies, all those things, learning skills, developing talents, exercise, all those things are hard, but they give great strength and great abilities, so they're worth putting in the time. Same with our social development. The third house is our ability to relate with others, our ability to associate with others, and that's a hard thing to learn, and we learn that with our siblings. So the siblings are the first people we learn that equal to equal, we've got two equals here, or many equals, working things out to be productive and work as a team. That's what the third Baba is about. Any associate we have that we do that with is a third Baba person. So if you're on a football team, your teammates are that third Baba. If you're on a work for Microsoft and you're on a team of people to build the latest, greatest version of Windows, then all the people you're working with are your third Baba, your teammates. And of course, then you have the people who are, then you have your boss, the person above you, and of course that's your 10th Baba. But the team that you're working with is the third Baba, okay? So our teammates, our siblings, all these people that we have to associate with in order to get something done, that's the third Baba. Anybody at all that you associate with in order to have some productive purpose is the third Baba, okay? And therefore, the Drekkana. So when it comes to the Drekkana, what we're really looking at is our capacity to be productive with other people. Okay, our capacity, our social ability with other people. How good is that social ability? And will that social ability lead to a successful conclusion of some purpose? Okay? So, a good Drekkana gives social skills and the concrete people to use those social skills with to concrete resolutions. Okay? Because all the Vargas 1 through 12 have to do with concrete, tangible things. Okay? Not intangibles. The other Vargas have more to do with intangibles. Okay? But Vargas 1 through 12 all have to do with tangible, concrete things. So a good Drekkana gives social skills and the concrete people to use those skills with. A bad Drekkana gives poor social skills and people with which social skills are not usable or no one to use those social skills with at all. Okay? Real simple. We're looking at the Drekkana, our social ability, an expansion of the third house. And that means, to begin with, our ability to relate to our siblings, and goes on to include our ability to relate and work with as a team, as a teammate with everyone else. Okay? Now, what's the natural question that arises, what's the difference between a teammate and a partner? Seventh house is partners, like your marriage partner, your business partner, etc. Well, the difference is A partnership is two people of differing abilities coming together to create something neither could create by themselves. So, in a marriage, you have a male and a female, two completely different polarized people who neither could come together and have a child all by themselves. But coming together in the seventh house, they have a child. Or a business partnership. One guy has the money, one guy has the product, the idea, the invention. So they come together and they create a union where they can be successful and create something that they couldn't have done. Neither of them could have done it alone. That's what a partnership is for. Okay, that's a seventh house thing. Now, teammates are different. Teammates are people you work with towards a common goal. Like, let's look at a football team. Any one man on the football team could potentially get the ball and run it across the field and get a touchdown, right? Any member of the football team has that ability. But by having the full football team all there together, they all have a better chance of it happening. Okay? They all have a better chance of it happening. They all have different skills, different abilities, and therefore they play different positions on the field that allow them to maximize each person's potential so that they all achieve the goal of winning. Okay? But each person could do it all by themselves. Okay? Any of them could do it all by themselves. All right? Let's look at a baseball team. Baseball team's almost more different. You got your pitcher, you're different, you're a first baseman, and so on. Well, the truth is, every person on the team can play every position. It's just they're all going to play different positions better. Okay, so they maximize their potential by each person playing the position they're best at. Now, that's different from a seventh house partnership, because in a seventh house partnership, we've got two people that only one person could only do one part and the other person could only do the other part. They couldn't do it by themselves. There's no way they could ever do it. So we have a male and a female. There's no way the male by himself is going to have a baby, or that the female by herself will have a baby. They both need to be there together. Now let's say there's a business partnership where one person has $1 million and he wants to purchase several acres of land to build upon, but he needs $2 million for the product. There's no way he could do it all by himself. He just cannot do it because he only has $1 million. So if he gets a business partner with another $1 million, now they can do it. So that's still a partnership, seventh house partnership, where they both need each other to do it. Teammates don't need that. Teammate can do it all by himself, but he'll just do it way more effectively if he has other people to do it with. So that's the difference between your third house teammates and your seventh house partnerships. If there's no way you can do it without that person, they're a partner. If you could do it by yourself, but having someone makes it so much more effective and successful, then it's a teammate or a third house associate. Okay? That's the difference. Keep that in mind. Okay. Parshar tells us how to calculate the Drekkanas. The Rashi thirds are the Drekkanas, and these are 36 going around 3 times, beginning from Aries. Own 5th and 9th in order from the Rashi. Narada, Agastya, and Durvasa are the Drekkana lords. Okay, some books call it Drekkana, other ones call it Drekkana. Jaimini calls it Drekkana, Parashar usually calls it Drekkana. It all means the same thing. So, we go around 3 times. We go around the zodiac 3 times, because there's 36 zodiacs in the Drekkana. We start, Aries, the first third of Aries, is the own sign of Aries, which is Aries. The second is the 5th from there, which is Leo. And the third is the 9th from there, which is Sagittarius. So Aries, the first Drekkana is Aries, the second is Leo, the third is Sagittarius. Then for Taurus, the first Drekkana is Taurus. The second Drekkana is the 5th from Taurus, which is Virgo. The third Drekkana is the 9th from Taurus, which is Capricorn. So, and that's so on and so on. That's how we go around and calculate the Drekkana. You can do that by yourself and have a handy little form. So you should be able to look at a Rashi chart and look at any sign and see what Drekkana the planet's in. You shouldn't have to go to the Drekkana chart. You should be able to just look and say, oh, it's at 15 Taurus, that's Virgo Drekkana. Okay? So write out a chart and break this up and do it as an exercise to help you remember that. That's how Parashara tells us to do the Drekkana. Now there's another method of calculating the Drekkana. And there's basically, like I mentioned in the horror class, I'm going to mention it again because it's important. There's basically two ways to calculate Vargas. We can space out the signs, or we can do the signs in regular order. The method of using the regular order is called parivritti, which means just going around the zodiac. In that order, it would be like this. Aries, Taurus, Gemini for the first three of Aries. Cancer, Leo, Virgo. Libra, Scorpio, Sag. Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. So between Aries and end of Cancer, we would have gone through the zodiac once. Then we would start again. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. Between 0 Leo and the end of Scorpio, we would have had the whole zodiac. And then we do that again from the beginning of Sag to the end of Pisces. We'd have the whole zodiac, Aries through Pisces. That's the way that all the Vargas that they calculate the Vargas in Tajika system. They always use that formula, that method. Now Parashara, on the other hand, he only uses that method if it's not possible to use this type of method, which this type of method is, since we go dividing the chart, the sign into three parts, each 1/3 of the sign of the zodiac is the next sign. So Aries is the first, 1/3 of the way around the zodiac from there is Leo, and 2/3 of the way of the zodiac is Sag. So it goes 1, 5, 9. Okay? He does that whenever it's possible. And that's only possible to use that method when you can divide the number of the Varga into 12 equally. So, for instance, you can divide 2 into 12 equally for the horror chart. You can divide 3 into 12 equally, you get 4. For the Drekkana chart, you can divide 4 into 12 equally, you get 3. And that's what we use for the Chaturtamsha. For the Saptamsha and the Navamsha and the Dasamsha, however, you can't divide those numbers into 12 equally. So he doesn't use this method for that. Okay? So it seems like Parashara prefers this method when possible and uses the other method when it's not possible to do this spatial one. That's why in the horror chart, the first half of Aries is Aries, the second half of Aries is Libra. Okay? So, simple that we calculated. But there is this other method around, the parivritti method of calculating the Drekkana that some astrologers will use. So you want to be aware of it. But it's not the method that Parashara follows. Okay? Now, Brihat Jataka says, they further say that the lords of the Drekkanas, first he gives this method, and then he says, other people say that the lords of the Drekkanas are the lord of the first, the lord of the 12th, and the lord of the 11th. That means the first of Aries would be Aries. The second of Aries would be the lord of the 12th, which is Jupiter. And the third of Aries would be the lord of the 11th, which is Saturn. And the first would be Mars. So they would call the Drekkana lords as Mars for the first of Aries, Jupiter for the second of Aries, and Saturn for the third of Aries. That's a Drekkana lord. That's not the Drekkana sign. That's not a Drekkana chart. That's when you want to divide each sign into three parts and find a ruler, a sub-ruler of those signs. Okay? We know Mars rules all of Aries, but the second third of Aries has a sub-ruler of Jupiter, and the third portion of Aries has a sub-ruler of Saturn. But this is not a Varga. It's not a Varga. It's not a Varga Kundali. It's not a Varga chart. It's just a way of finding different lords for different parts of signs. Just like in the Hora, we did something similar, where the first half of the Hora was ruled by the lord of the sign. The second half of the sign is ruled by the lord of the 11th from there. So we talked about that in the Hora charts. The very same idea. In fact, this is the second part of the very same sutra from Brihat Jataka that talked about the Hora. So that's a technique of using different lords for a sign. It is not a Varga. So we're not going to cover that technique in this course. Maybe at some point we'll cover that technique. But simply put, what it is, the first lord represents the sign, the thing of the sign itself. The second lord, which is Jupiter, the 12th from there, represents the expenses made on account of that thing. And the third lord is the 11th, which means the profits that come as a result for putting out those expenses. So, you want your 11th lord from every sign to be really strong, which means you get more reward on account of that sign. Okay? If your 12th or your second portion lord is in bad shape, which has to do with the 12th house from that sign, well, that just shows a lot of expenses on account of that sign, or expenses on bad account if it's in bad shape. On good account, and in the context of them being an investment, if it's in good shape. So that's a technique that maybe we'll explore later at some point. It is not a Varga. But I wanted to mention that so that you don't start calculating your Varga in a funny way like this. One of the unfortunate things in Vedic astrology is some of the books on that mention things with Vargas will give a mix of methods for how to calculate Vargas all as being one system. So they'll use like some funky system like I just talked about for calculating the Drekkana lords, but then calculate the Navamsha right and then use them together. No, that's not right. When we're looking at Varga charts, there's a certain way to calculate it, and it's not that way of taking the Lord of the 11th and the Lord of the 12th like I just showed you. That's a technique. It's not for creating a Varga. So just understand that. So I wanted to mention it so when you're reading the old books, you don't say, wait a minute, why didn't Ernst calculate it that way? Because it's not a Varga chart. That's why. Okay. Now for the fun part. As always. Now we know how to calculate the Drekkana. It's real easy. The first third of the sign is the same sign. The second third is the 5th from there, and the last third is the 9th from there. That happens for all the signs. So through that, we end up going through the zodiac 3 times. And we have 3 zodiacs in there. Now, what are the Drekkana deities? Parashar is the only one that talks about the deities. It says Narada, Agastya, and Durvasa are the Drekkana lords. So, I'll write these down here. Narada, Agastya, and Durvasa. So these are the 3 what we call Deva Rishis. These are all immortal Rishis that are going to exist throughout time, basically. And they're the Deva Rishis, which means they're actually the Rishis that the Devas may go to for consultation, or the gods themselves go to those Rishis for consultation. And they're also the Rishis that watch and look out for the Devas. Just like you may have your guru who's watching out for you. Well, who watches out for the Devas? That's right, the 3 Deva Rishis. So these are amongst the most powerful Rishis that there are, okay, that there is. Now, Narada, most people have heard about who have any experience with Hinduism, because he has some big roles in the Ramayana, and he also has some big roles in the in Mahabharata, in Krishna's life. Agastya and Durvasa are lesser known. Although in South India, everyone knows of Agastya, because Agastya is the one who created the Tamil language, founder of many branches of Ayurvedic medicine, and is really one of the most revered saints in South India. Durvasa is somewhat well known, but Narada is by far the most well known by most people around the world who know anything about Hinduism. But these 3 rishis, these 3 Deva rishis, are being the Deva rishis, they tend to help the rishis on the astral plane. But then they do occasionally come down to Earth, and there's many mythological stories of them when they're on Earth, of the things that they do. All of which are not good. But what they do on Earth they incarnate upon earth as the will of God to make things happen in accordance with God's will. Okay? They make things happen in accordance with God's will on earth. So when we look at this and we say, gosh, these Drekkanas, the lords of these Drekkanas, are these three Deva Rishis, which are really the will of God on earth, that sounds pretty profound, isn't it? And that's, it is true. The Drekkana is that profound. It has to do with the will with which each planet is being used. Is it being used with the will of Narada, Agastya, or Durvasa? Now, either way, it's always being used with their will. But the question is, does the ego know that or not? Okay, now that's a huge difference. Okay, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But first, let's talk about who these three rishis are. Okay. Okay, like I said, these rishis represent the will of God as manifested on earth as man. Primarily as these three great rishis, but also as the will of God within each of us individuals, even if we're way, 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 way far away from any rishi status, okay? So you want to look at the will of God in a person's chart, where do you go to? That's right, you go to the Drekkana and those lords. Now, Narada, for who rules the first Drekkana of every sign, he represents the creative will of God, okay? That brings about the new things and makes the new things happen that's required for creation to go the way that God wants it to go. So any planets in Narada Drekkanas are being used with more creative will. They're creating new things. They want to create new things. They're thinking of the good new things to do. And they're manifesting and changing creation and bringing about new things in creation that are necessary according to God's divine plan. Okay? So Narada, we're going to put creative. And that relates Narada to Brahma energy, right? Because Brahma is the creator. Okay? It doesn't make it necessarily Brahma energy, it relates it to Brahma energy. Okay, Agastya is the preservative will that wants to maintain the right order of things where everyone can prosper and grow spiritually most effectively. Okay? So he's the preserver. The preservative will. The will of God for the good things to stay as they are so that people can grow and mature. Okay? The healthy, the good healthy environment and maintaining that good healthy environment, to maintain the known environment and the known things so that we can grow into other things and have those known things as a foundation, that's the preservative will. Okay? So he wants to maintain the proper order and balance of things so there's a natural progression of spiritual growth. When there's a good, healthy, rich environment, man has a natural progression of spiritual growth. Just time, kala, the force of time, naturally spiritually evolves man at a nice, steady, gentle pace when man is in a healthy environment. And Agastya, the will of Agastya, is the preservative will that wants to maintain that environment. Okay? And that we can say is Vishnu energy. Okay, Vishnu is the preserver, right? Then there's Durvasa. Now Durvasa is the destructive will. Okay? The will to destroy. The will to tear down things that are no longer useful or necessary. The will to destroy negative things that are holding people back. That's the Durvasa will, or the destructive will. And that relates to Shiva energy. To destroy so that the new can be reborn out of the ashes. That's the Durvasa will. So, Narada, in myth, Narada and Agastya are very lovable, kind people. But Narada is always sort of playing these funny games. Agastya is someone you can totally count on and trust on. Whereas with Narada, you never know what's going to happen from what he says. But what he says is always something really wonderful. Durvasa, he's this irascible person who constantly, you do the slightest thing wrong, he gets pissed and he curses you. And he basically travels around the world cursing people and ruining people's lives. That's what he does. You don't ever want to meet Durvasya, because he curses you so your whole life falls apart and everything crumbles. So some stories about these three. Narada, there's a lot of stories about. Some of them are really interesting. For instance, in the Mahabharata, when Krishna's parents were locked up in prison, and the first child was born, and then, Krishna's uncle, who was the king at the time, and wanted to avoid the prophecy of Krishna's birth, because the prophecy of Krishna's birth was that the child of his brother and sister-in-law would be the cause of death of him. So he heard that, he locked up his brother and sister-in-law with the idea of taking their children and killing them so that they could not cause his death later. So the first child was born, and the people brought the first child to this king, to Kamsa, if I remember was his name correctly. And the king, looked at the baby and said, "Oh, this is just the first baby. It's the 8th baby that's going to cause the death of me. So I'm not worried about this baby. Take it back." So, the servants taking the baby back, or the guards rather taking the baby back. And all of a sudden Narada shows up. And Narada says, "How can you let that child leave?" And the king says, "That's the 8th. That's the first child. It's the 8th I'm worried about." Narada says, "Yeah, you're worried about the 8th. But the prophecy didn't say the 8th from what? Was it the 8th from the first? Or was it the 8th from the second, which would be the 9th? Or was it be the 8th from the 9th, which would be the first?" He basically said it could be any 8th child from one starting point. If they have 6 kids, the 8th from 6 could be kid number 4, So the king said, "Wow, you're right." So he ran after the guards, grabbed the kid, the little infant had just been born, and killed the infant. And as a result, he ended up killing each of the infants. Okay? And so this is a story of Narada's, sort of mingling in affairs that seemed like they weren't any of his business, to bring about the effects of God's will on earth, and to protect the Devas. Now, why did he do that? Because those first children, all those younger siblings of Krishna, those firstborn of Krishnas, were never meant to be born. And so he spurred on this idea in the king's mind to destroy these kids. Now, he didn't kill the kids himself. He just let the king know, gave him a new idea, a new concept that caused him to kill all the kids. Because it was necessary for those kids to not have a life on earth. They were just meant to be born and to die. So Narada managed to take care of that. So that's a role where he's almost working in a Durvasa-type destructive nature, but he's still not, because he created in the mind of the king an idea that caused him to cause actions. So that's one thing Narada, Drekkanas do. They'll oftentimes give us a new idea with which to approach things. Sometimes even a new idea with which to approach something destructive. Okay, but it's creativity. It's a new idea. Most of Narada's stories aren't so much like that. And one of the famous stories is Vyasa, who had written down the Vedas into writing for the first time, who had written a whole Mahabharata, and basically who's responsible for preserving the old essence of Hinduism into writing for the first time, was depressed. And he didn't know why he was depressed. He didn't feel right. And so Narada shows up one day and says, "How are you?" And Narada knew he was depressed, but he was just playing with Vyasa. And, Vyasa said, "I don't know, something doesn't feel right. I don't know what it is. I feel like something's missing." And Narada goes, "Well, I'll tell you what's wrong." He goes, "Even though you wrote down everything about Dharma in the Mahabharata, and even though you wrote down all the Vedas and give all the knowledge to the world, the reason you're not feeling happy is because you haven't written a devotional book about God. You haven't written a book of devotional stories about God, stories that can help people fall in love with God. So that's what you need to do." So Vyasa said, "Okay," and he went and wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam, which has all the stories about the different avatars and incarnations of Vishnu or God upon earth. And reading that book creates up a lot of spiritual devotion and the ability to see Vishnu in everything around our life. It's really, out of the things that he wrote down, the Srimad Bhagavatam is the best starting point for really learning to see God in our daily lives. So then Vyasa wrote that book and was happy. So here Narada spurred on this idea for him to create a new book. It was his own creation in a way. It was more his own idea. It wasn't just recording history and copying down the Vedas. It was, his own literature, the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that was a creative urge of Narada. Then in the Ramayana, we have the birth of Rama. And Rama, we know, was an incarnation of Vishnu. And Vishnu can't just incarnate on earth as a human that's born as a babe and lives a human life, because that body has to have karma attached to it in order to be born. So Vishnu had this problem, how he was going to take birth as Lord Rama. So he used Narada to solve this problem. And the way he used that is that Narada was, traveling down the road one day, and he came across, he bumped into Shiva. And he had heard about how Shiva had been so enamored by Mohini, which was an avatar of Vishnu that was so beautiful and voluptuous that she teased the nectar of immortality away from the demons in the churning of the ocean story, which I write about in Graha Sutras. So anyway, Narada sort of teased Shiva about the fact that he totally fell in love with Mohini to the point where he chased her around the world with semen dripping all over because he was so lustful for Mohini. And wherever his semen landed is where diamonds were formed. So he made fun of Shiva for this. And so, and Narada said, I would never have a problem with being attracted to any woman. He goes, I'm way above that. And Shiva just said, we'll see about that. We'll see. Now, in the story of Shiva, where he was chasing Mohini around the earth, after Mohini turned back to Vishnu, Shiva just stopped and smiled, and Shiva's wife saw the whole thing, and his wife was right there watching him make a fool of himself. And Shiva just said, Vishnu can make us do anything we want. So he wasn't embarrassed, he didn't have any shame, he just said, Vishnu has the power to make fools out of all of us, So he knew that when Narada came to him and poked fun at him for being made a fool of by Vishnu. So Shiva just said, we'll see. So Narada continues across on his road, and he comes to this village where all the people in the village were as beautiful as Vishnu, and all the women, the males were as beautiful as Vishnu, and all the women were as beautiful as Mohini. Not Mohini, I'm sorry. All the women were as beautiful as Lakshmi. So he's like, wow, I've never heard of this place. How can that be? The people here are so beautiful and perfect. And he just happened to come to the place on the very day that the king was giving his daughter for marriage. When the king realized Narada had come to town, he went and got him, and he said, oh, Narada, I'm so glad you came just in time for my daughter's wedding. She's going to select her husband today from all the suitors and princes who've come from all over the world. Will you take a look at my daughter and tell me what you think about her? So Narada comes and takes a look at the daughter, and when he looks, he just doesn't look for, physical beauty. He looks for all the marks of character, her face, her bodily proportions, the shape of her hands and feet, and just reads her whole being by her body. And he looked at her and he said to the king, whoever she marries will never die, which means she's so fortunate, she's so perfect, that she'll never have to suffer the loss of the man she loves. Because she's so fortunate, because every part of her was perfectly formed. And in the back of his mind, he started thinking, how am I going to get her for myself? So then, he decided he needed Vishnu's help. So he went to Vishnu and he prayed to Vishnu. And he said, give me the face of Hari, so I look so beautiful that she can't think of any other man and chooses me during the groom selection. So he was sure Vishnu would grant his wish because Vishnu always did, because they were like buddies, and Narada was a really good, Deva Rishi here. So at the Swambhava, which is when the grooms line up and the princess chooses them, she wouldn't even look at him, and she picked someone else. And he got so upset, and then he noticed that there was two of Shiva's attendants, two of Shiva's servants, were, close by looking at him, pointing at him, and laughing. And he got so upset at this, he didn't understand what was happening, so he looked in a reflective surface and saw that his face looked like a monkey. And he got so mad at Shiva's attendants for, making fun of him, that he just looked at them and blasted them into ash. And then he was so pissed at Vishnu because Vishnu made him look like a monkey. And Hari is the name of Vishnu, so he wanted to have the beauty of Vishnu. But Hari also means a monkey. So Vishnu instead gave him the face of a monkey, just what Narada asked for. So Narada was so pissed off, he storms to Vaikuntha, where Vishnu lives, and yells at Vishnu and says, "How can you do this? We live on earth, we suffer, man suffers. You have no idea what it's like up here in heaven. You have no empathy for us to play this joke on me when I asked you for it sincerely for something I really, really hoped for. I'm going to curse you that you have to live on earth and suffer the pangs of earthly living and suffer the loss of your loved one, just as I have." And the minute Narada said that, he realized that he just cursed Vishnu. And he felt so bad, he fell to Vishnu's feet and he goes, "I'm so sorry, I don't know what came over me. I didn't mean to say that." And Vishnu just pats him on the shoulder and raises him up and says, "You didn't do anything that I didn't want you to do." And because of that curse, Vishnu was born on earth as Lord Rama. So Narada created the birth of Lord Rama out of his curse. So these are some of the crazy mythological stories revolving around Narada. So he's always in these situations where things don't quite seem to make sense, but somehow in the end they do make sense. There's another funny story where Vishnu is looking for a sincere devotee on earth. And he tells Narada to go find a sincere devotee. And, Narada goes around and finds a priest who everyone respects, and he finds out that the person's heart's not really sincere. And he can't find anyone. He travels around, looks at everyone, he comes back to Vishnu, and he goes, "I didn't find any really single, most sincere person who truly only believed in you." And, and Vishnu had told him, he said, "Anyone you meet that you think is sincere, tell them that I will be there as soon as they can pass, as soon as I get done passing an elephant through the eye of a needle." So everyone that Narada went to, who seemed holy, he'd say, "Vishnu will be here as soon as he's done passing an elephant through the eye of the needle." And that so-called holy person would say, "Oh, don't be stupid. Nobody can pass an elephant through the eye of the needle." So everyone he went to had promised reacted in that way to his question that Vishnu had told him to answer. So finally he came across this guy building a fence. And this guy was trying to pound these fence posts into the ground, and he was totally drunk. And he was, could hardly swing his hammer properly. He's totally drunk building this fence. And he's saying, "God, why don't you come down here and help me build this damn fence?" And he's totally drunk off his gourd. And he's, yelling for God to show up and help him. And Narada goes up to him and says, "Vishnu will be here as soon as he gets done passing an elephant through the eye of a needle." And the guy said, "Well, then he should be here any second, because Vishnu can do anything." And then boom, Vishnu shows up and helps him build the fence. So, Narada always has these little myths attached to him that have an air of irony or something funny or something nonsensical about him. Because when we start creating something new, it almost always seems like new creations are oftentimes seem insensible. They don't make sense. The creative will always breaks us free from that status quo into something that people don't understand at first. Like when they invented the computer and they took it to the IBM, the guy in charge of IBM at the time, and the person said, there's a worldwide use for these computers things. And the IBM guy said, there might be a worldwide use for one of these computers. But look at what's happened. There's a worldwide use for billions of computers, right? So, but at the same time, what he said was sort of true. We're going more and more into one computer with the internet, right? In which sense, one huge computer. So, whenever new things are created, there's oftentimes this funny aspect to it, or this aspect of it that's not understood until the story is over. And so Narada's stories often have those types of things related to them. Now, Agastya, most of his stories aren't as colorful. His stories are more about doing things to help people, to maintain their health, to maintain their well-being. He's responsible for founding Ayurvedic medicine. So he does that to maintain health, so we have a healthy body and we can naturally progress and grow, which is the preservative will of Vishnu. There's one myth where the Devas were in trouble and risked of being defeated. So he did I don't remember the story exactly, I just forgetting it for some reason. He somehow did something with the oceans so the Devas would be protected from defeat. He didn't kill anybody, he didn't fight the opposing force. He just did something with the ocean to maintain the power hierarchy as it was, with the Devas being on top at the time. So his stories always revolve around helping people, maintaining people in their normal circumstances, which are good circumstances at the time. Durvasya, he's always going around and cursing people. The most important story about him really cursing anybody is when Indra pissed him off one time. Indra did something that Durvasa didn't think was right. So he cursed Indra to lose his kingdom. And as a result, he lost his kingdom to Bali, the Asura Bali, of which there's many myths told. So study more up on these, guys, and just get a feeling for their myths and read their myths, and I'll give you a feeling for their Drekkanas. So Durvasa Drekkanas are always going to be Drekkanas where we're going to break things down, or the people ruled by the planets in those Drekkanas will break things in our life down, and through that give us the room to grow into something better. So if you have Venus in a Durvasa Drekkana, you're going to have some destructive aspects to your Venetian love life, which is going to help you break past your restrictions or inhibitions and whatever to become a better person. So Durvasa, he never destroys without the long-term purpose of something better being on that foundation. Okay? But he represents that destructive will. So you see a lot of planets in a person's chart in Durvasa Drekkanas. You know that a lot of their life is going to be about things breaking down so that they can pick up the pieces and build something better, more successful. You see a person who has a lot of Narada Nakshatras, or Drekkanas, they're going to be very creative. The people in their life are going to be very creative in what they do in that person's life. So it's both the person being creative and the people ruled by the planets that are in the Narada Drekkanas having a creative influence on the person. And the people ruled by planets that are Durvasa Drekkanas will be people that the person, that destroy things in the person's life, that tear him down, that break him down so he can grow into something better at a future date. And also things that they destroy in their lives, okay, with lots of destructive energy. And Agastya, preservative energy, those Drekkanas are the planets that the people that are represented by the planet and the person, their relationship with that planet, will want to maintain the order of things. Even if it's not great, it'll still want to preserve and maintain the natural order of things, the way things are, because it feels like the known is better than the unknown. It likes to maintain that, work within the structure of what already is established. So these are more fixed and aren't prone to so many changes. Narada Drekkanas are very prone to change out of creativity, changing things, raising them up to the next level of something better. Durvasa are about completely tearing things down. So a person with Venus and Durvasa Drekkana, for instance, may have a relationship paradigm that gets completely destroyed in this lifetime, and then they have to reform their relationship paradigm as they continue to grow. Okay? Venus and Narada Drekkana will have a relationship paradigm that they believe in, about which they're always improving upon. They're always adding something new to better that relationship paradigm. And a person with an Agastya Venus, for instance, they would have a relationship paradigm that they found was worthwhile and sound, and they would maintain that in its most true form that they have found. Okay? So that's the difference between the will behind these planets. Is it the will to create, the will to maintain, or the will to destroy? Okay, let's make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, grahas and Drekkanas ruled by Narada are used with creative will that wishes to bring about new ideas and things. Okay, grahas and Drekkanas ruled by Agastya are used with a preservative will that wants to maintain things while maximizing those things. So it wants to maximize it. So an Agastya Venus will be in the marriage it's in, and it'll want to maximize everything in that marriage. Okay? Everything it does, it'll want to enjoy it more thoroughly. In a Narada Drekkana, it'll want to create new things to always do with their partner, and new experiences. In a Durvasa, well, if it's not happy with its relationship, it's going to be more prone to just destroy it and move on to another one, or to just root out the things it hates and not want anything to do with them, and then try to find what it likes to do with that person again. Grahas and Drekkanas ruled by Durvasa are used with destructive will that wants to uproot things so that better things can eventually be done. Okay. Now, that's the will behind them. But is it going to be constructive or destructive? Is it going to be a good or bad thing, a productive thing or a non-productive thing? For that, we have to always study the Lajitadi Avashtas of the planets, right? So, grahas in good Lajitadi Avashtas in Narada Drekkanas are used with a creative will that supports the ambitions of everyone involved. Because remember, the Drekkana is about the will we use in the context of everyone we're associated with, the people we're associating with. Okay? That's when we use our will, when there's another person involved, right? That's when will becomes important. So, good Lajitadi Avashtas and Narada Drekkana are used with a creative will that supports the ambitions of everyone involved. Everyone on the team is feeling good about the creative idea and puts their energy behind it. Those in bad Lajitadi Avashtas are used with the self-centered creative will that creates unhappiness with everyone involved. So you could be creative in a way that is virtuous, because because Drekkana has to do with our virtues of how we associate with people. Does our creative will take into account where everyone else is going? Or is it just a self-centered ambition to prove ourselves how great we are? Well, if it's a bad Lajitadi Avashta, it's a self-centered ambition. It has nothing to do with our social responsibilities or the care of our associates. It just has to do with asserting our will to prove something. Okay? Grahas in good Lajitadi Avashtas in Agastya Drekkanas are used with a preservative will that maintains a healthy situation for everyone involved. So it's the preservative will that considers everyone's feelings involved, all the teammates are included, all the associates are included, so that everyone can feel like it's a good situation that's worth maintaining. But Agastya Drekkana's planets in bad Lajitadi Avashtas maintain situations that are a benefit only for themselves without really caring about if they benefit other people. Grahas in good Lajitadi Avashtas and Durvasa Drekkanas destroy with the understanding for the good that can come to everyone, and with compassion for those who are affected by the destruction. So if a person has Venus and Durvasa and Drekkana, and they feel like they have to terminate their relationship, they're going to take their partner's feelings into account. But if it's in a bad Lajitadi Avashta, they're just going to say, they won't even care about how the other person feels. Okay? They won't have any compassion or understanding for that person. Those in bad Lajitadi Avashtas destroy with no purpose and with no care but for themselves. Okay? And grahas and Narada Drekkanas provide new opportunities ruled by the grahas that the individual will do great things with. So the planets in Narada Drekkanas indicate new opportunities that the person can do great things with if the planets are in good Logitati Avashtas. Grahas in Agastya Drekkanas allow for the individual to make the most of the current things ruled by the grahas, and the individual will have a lot of happiness with these things if the graha is in a good Logitati Avashta. So, you've got a good situation that you want to hold on to because you're happy with it when the planet's in a good Logitati Avashta. But if the graha is in a bad Logitati Avashta, the person will feel stuck in those things. Like the way things are is like a prison somewhat. Grahas and Durvasa Drekkanas will frustrate and destroy those things represented by the grahas, so that the individual has the opportunity for great growth, which they will make if the graha is in a good Logitati Avashta. So if Venus is in a bad Logitati Avashta, and it's in a Durvasa Drekkana, relationships are going to be frustrating and destructive and fall apart, and the person won't even create any growth out of those things if it's in a bad Logitati Avashta. But if it's in a good Logitati Avashta, when those things happen, they'll do it with the understanding of what they're learning, they'll process it and move on to a better relationship. Then, Narada Drekkanas believe that there's something to be done. Meaning there's something better we can do, there's something new we can do. There's always something to do. Durvasa Drekkanas believe that there are things that should not be done. So Durvasa usually goes around cursing people because they do something wrong. And so he curses them. They're impolite. They're disrespectful. They walk by a temple without paying attention to the temple. Then he sees that stuff and he just curses them. Okay? So, planets in Durvasa Drekkanas make us approach things with the idea of this is what you shouldn't do. So Venus in a Durvasa Drekkana thinks, not what I should do in my marriage, but what I shouldn't do. I shouldn't cheat. I shouldn't beat my wife. I shouldn't do this and that. It believes in the should not. Narada Drekkanas, though, in a Venus and Narada Drekkanas thinking, I should tell my wife I love her once a day. I should take my wife out on her birthday, and so on. It thinks of the things it should do to make a relationship work. Durvasa thinks of the things that you shouldn't do to make a relationship work. So the do's are Durvasa. The do's, are Narada. The do nots are Agastya. Let me try again. The do's are Narada. The do nots are Durvasa. Okay. And Agastya Drekkanas believe that harmony should be maintained, which means Agastya Drekkanas believe that we should find happiness in the way things are being done. Okay? In conclusion, grahas and Narada Drekkanas are used creatively, indicate new opportunities, and make us believe that there is something great to do. Grahas and Agastya Drekkanas are used to maintain order, indicate stable situations, and make us believe in the value of the known security and the known good, and give us the ability to find happiness in those known things. Grahas and Durvasa Drekkanas are used to tear things down that are no longer necessary, indicate disruptive situations that help us grow, and make us believe that certain things should not be done, or else there will be undesirable repercussions. Okay? And all things equal, meaning the planet being in the same condition, Agastya nakshatras are the most comfortable. Having something you like, and that thing being maintained so you can fully enjoy it, is the nicest thing. Okay? All the other factors equal. So that's the lords and how to calculate the Drekkana, and we'll have, the next class will deal with the important bhavas and planets in the Drekkana.